We can thus say with some confidence that, under the assumption of no major change in the present system, population and industrial growth will certainly stop within the next century, at the latest. There's nothing more entertaining in life than speculating the end of just that, the end of civilization, the falling of great empires, the collapse of large nations and world superpowers alike. At least that's what you'll find all across the harsh world of social media. We are humans. Our eyes and minds are drawn to big, bold titles with extremely negative thumbnails promising that this time is different, or the end and collapse of a major civilization is happening right now. This is no surprise, nor is it an accident. News headlines are specifically written with negative vocabulary to draw in curious readers and get more views. Data studies have proven that to be the case, with negative words drastically improving the chance of you clicking on the article or video. I acknowledge the irony as the title and thumbnail of this video literally contains all of these negative features that I've been describing, but let's just be honest. It's interesting to speculate on the end of the world because nobody knows the answer. In fact, there have been hundreds of failed publicly made predictions in the past, and hundreds more that will most likely fail in the future. Many made on the premise of a major religious event, others based on nuclear war or natural disasters, in the most likely scenarios involving major astrological catastrophes like an asteroid collision or massive supernova. We could go on forever and ever. There's literally a Wikipedia page titled List of Dates Predicted for Apocalyptic Events, with hundreds of line items of various world-ending scenarios going back to year 1. However, it's one thing to make an unsupported prediction based on faith, or how the pyramids of Giza align with the stars, or guess when a supervolcano eruption will occur. And it's another to use practical factors, advanced modeling techniques, and real data that point to signs of potential trouble. And lucky for you, that's just what I have for you today. For those of you that have not already heard, introducing the Limits to Growth, your most practical and data-driven guide to the ultimate demise and collapse of human civilization as we know it. Oh, and worth mentioning, its projected date 2040, so probably in your lifetime. Let's get into it. In 1972, an international group of highly respected researchers and intellectuals deemed the Club of Rome put together the formula for the collapse of human society on the simple premise, as the title of the study may suggest, that exponential growth in factors like population will be too much in a world full of finite resources to handle, and due to one of these factors or another, our society will collapse by 2040. The study produced 12 outcomes, or scenarios as they call it, most of which resulted in rather dark conclusions. Too many people leading to populations starving from a lack of food, too much pollution leading to severe climate change and extreme weather events. I'm sure you get the idea. We all know if you want to make some bold predictions, you better have some pretty good data backing you up. And that's just what World 3 was used for. World 3 is the software that was used by researchers to simulate the extremely complex global economy that we live in today, and relies on these 8 primary factors. Connect them all together in a computer model and you have something that looks like this: a jumbled mess of interconnected global metrics. Using both past and current data, World 3 could predict future possibilities, the scenarios which we mentioned earlier. As you could imagine, encapsulating the vast amount of problems that plagued the world and its people into a single model, intertwining the technical, social, economic, and political elements is quite difficult even with today's technology. And to execute a project of this magnitude and complexity on the boxes of computers that were used in the 60s and 70s, with 1/1,000,000th of the memory and computing power we have today, seems like quite the costly undertaking for a half-reliable simulation at best. So that begs the question, what was the Club of Rome out to do? Why would they allocate all of their resources and intelligence towards a simulation? After all, this was a group of the most important and valued scientists spanning the entire globe. Well, they sought to answer the world problematicae, or the predicament of mankind. We as humans tend to make decisions in vacuums. Our governments and policymakers examine single items in the world problem, like wealth inequality, unemployment, hunger, inflation, and hundreds of other issues, without understanding that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. That change in one element means change in the others. Of course, how easy would it be making decisions assuming all other things equal? Unfortunately, that's just not how the world operates. Every decision you make affects another aspect of your life in some capacity. Likewise, on a larger scale, every decision that the world's leaders make affects another aspect of the way we live our lives today. And this is the problem that World 3 hoped to solve. Telling the future is impossible, but using a complex, interconnected model certainly helps and raises awareness. By simulating the future and the various scenarios that could cause eventual societal collapse, we could certainly start to take some steps in the right direction. Examples being investing more capital into waste management solutions, becoming more productive and efficient with non-renewable resources, and policies that encourage clean energy technologies and discourage non-renewable usage. The point being to use the model to drive policy and economic agendas. Now, I have some bad news. Unfortunately, the most widely discussed scenario, mainly because it's the one we are following most closely today, is the business as usual. A depletion of non-renewable resources like oil, coal, and natural gas becomes a limiting factor to industrial and agricultural output. Think no fuel to power homes, cars, and innovation. With agricultural output declining, widespread food shortages sweep the globe. With a lack of food comes a capped population, birth rates eventually decline and death rates rise. Population declines, therefore also decreasing the industrial output, our ability to innovate and increase economic prosperity. An endless loop of declining standards of living. Wow, okay. And it's worth noting that this scenario was re-emphasized in the 2004 World 3 rendition. The model was updated with more recent data and 2 additional variables with the intent of further increasing accuracy, only to conclude that collapse via the business as usual scenario was still the most likely result. Let's take a step back for a second. I don't know about you, but this seems quite dramatic. And frankly, when you have to explicitly state that you may seem overdramatic, that may just be the case. However, let's show our respects. U Thant, former Secretary General of the United Nations, said, "I very much fear that the problems, the many world problems we have mentioned thus far, will have reached such staggering proportions that they will be beyond our capacity to control." In other words, by the time we make changes, it may just be too late. The window to salvage today's world economy is closing fast. Despite all this negativity and doomsday talk, there is some good news. As I'm sure you could imagine, criticisms came in bunches over the years. One of the major headlines being World 3 not giving enough respect to humanity's ability to invent technological solutions to environmental challenges. In other words, not being able to innovate fast enough to keep up with the world's ever-expanding list of problems. Surprisingly enough, authors of the Limits to Growth have continually pushed back and have stated that the assumptions used in the World 3 model, specifically regarding humankind's ingenuity and ability to develop timely technological solutions, was actually very optimistic, significantly higher than historical averages. An example of inadequate technology today, even with all of the AI innovation taking place, is waste management. Plastic waste is expected to grow exponentially over the coming years, which plays right into the business as usual scenario. Pollution taking off without sufficient disposal collection and disposal infrastructure. We dump 2.12 billion tons of waste into landfills every year. And for perspective, the United States is slated to run out of landfill space within the next 15 to 25 years. The trash needs to go somewhere, and this necessity will hopefully drive innovation to eliminate this problem in the future. How will it be done? I don't know, ejecting it into space, recycling it into reusable or biodegradable material. You come up with the answer and you'll be a billionaire, I promise. Also, now would be a good time to mention that the World 3 model doesn't account for any massive technological change, like being able to mine infinite resources from asteroids or humans becoming a multiplanetary species, for example. These innovations are hypothetically possible, but accounting for any massive technological leap like these is nearly impossible. And although World 3 assumes an optimistic outlook for technological growth, significantly above historical averages, I would be surprised if this were actually the case. Think back, just 16 years ago, the first iPhone was released. Look how far we've come. Today, Apple has released VR, AR headsets, watches, TVs, all connected in a cloud-based ecosystem dependent on AI-driven data centers. I mean, who could have possibly imagined this speed of innovation, even in the most optimistic and bullish predictions? Moore's Law has consistently doubled the computing power of microchips every 2 years for the past 50. Every decade or so, critics saying it has to stop eventually. There's no way this speed can continue. This time is different. And yet, here we are today. Now, don't get me wrong, eventually it will be physically impossible to continue increasing the number of transistors on microchips with today's technology. However, who knows what the future will hold? We've figured it out for the last 50, so I'm sure there will be new industry-shifting technologies in the future. All of this to say, I think when put to the test, humanity will deliver. At least that's me being optimistic, and models that attempt to predict the speed of technological innovation will simply not be able to catch up, at least for now. In a 2021 study, Harvard researcher Gaia Harrington performed the most up-to-date simulation that we have regarding the world problematicae. Using today's data as well as the updated World 3 model configuration, she reached a few conclusions. The largest and most important one being, today's situation more closely follows the comprehensive technology scenario. And as you can clearly see, this resembles quite the different story than that of the business-as-usual collapse. Rising costs for technology eventually causes a lack of affordability, therefore a reduction in agricultural and industrial spending, and ultimately decreasing the potential of future innovation. Technology will stall out here and the world will reach a rather stabilized state. Limited growth, good standard of living, low pollution, and ample resources. Not a bad deal. No collapse, just stabilization. But one important thing to note, even in the most optimistic scenario, the stabilized world scenario, industrial output or the speed of innovation will slow down and stabilize. Whether we are tracking the business as usual, comprehensive technology, or stabilized world scenarios, they all point to a collapse, slowdown, or best case stabilization of the industrial output by the 22nd century. Harrington also concludes that the stabilized world scenario is possible, but would require a transformation of societal priorities and policies. Policymakers would need to ditch their focus on economic growth and rather work towards societal stability, which, to be honest, doesn't seem super likely. In capitalistic economies like the United States, growth is at the forefront of government policy, and as a result, societal stability, like the wealth gap between poor and rich individuals, or the access to quality education for urban residents, are sacrificed in the name of innovation. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that, but just an example. With all this being said, it seems that we've reached a fairly reasonable conclusion. The notion of collapse may be slightly overdrawn, but the intention behind the Club of Rome to heighten public understanding and improve public discourse on the world problematicae is what really counts. No matter what scenario we end up following the most closely, it's impossible to perfectly model the future of such a complex, webbed mess of social, political, technological, and economic problems. Whether it be black swan events or unprecedented jumps in technological innovation, the world changes fast. And the Club of Rome said it themselves. The exact timing of these events is not meaningful given the many uncertainties in the model. However, mankind has compiled an impressive record of pushing back the apparent limits to population and economic growth by a series of spectacular technological advances. And because of this, it is quite natural that many people expect technological breakthroughs to go on raising physical ceilings indefinitely. In other words, we have continued to engineer and innovate in the face of physical limitations, but eventually the time will come when we will need to rely on change somewhere else, other than in technology, to fix the predicament of mankind. The limits to growth, although making for extremely scary headlines and gloomy thumbnails, is not meant to predict the end of society as we know it, but rather designed to educate the public and the policymakers of our world on what could and will transpire in the coming decades if things stay the way they are today. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace!